So as you can see there, we use both drip tape and drip tubing in our gardens. I think there are some situations where drip tape works better. There are other situations where drip. What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope all y'all are having a fantastic day. It is Monday, October 9th here in South Georgia. And lately we've been getting a ton of questions about our irrigation system. People want to know what's the difference between drip tape and drip tubing. I just so happen to have some irrigation work I need to do out here in the garden today. So I thought I'd take you along and then we'll have that conversation about the pros and cons of drip tape and drip tubing. So here we have our main fall garden plot that's about halfway planted. We didn't plant it all at one time because we were waiting on the chickens to finish up on this soybean cover crop. The chickens are now over there eating some sweet potato leaves so we can finally finish our irrigation setup here. And just a quick recap here, when we planted these 4 rows of Brussels sprouts, cabbage, broccoli, and cauliflower, we went ahead and buried our drip tape using our FAD system, furrow, amend, drip. And so we already have drip tape underneath each of these rows. We already have the fittings on the drip tape. All we need to do today is lay our main line tubing out, or our supply line that will feed this drip tape, and hook up our pressure regulator and our filter. And I should mention before we get started, we have all these pieces listed with links, everything broken down piece by piece on blogs on our website at lazydogfarm.com. We've got a blog for fruit tree irrigation, a blog for in-ground drip irrigation, a blog for our raised bed irrigation. You can go check those out on our website. I'll also try to remember to put links in the description below. So the first thing we need to do is run this main line tubing along this side of the plot where we have those row starts installed at the beginning of each row. Now, this gets a little confusing for some people. This is 5/8 or 1/2 inch main line tubing. Some companies refer to the inside diameter, 1/2 inch. Some companies refer to the outside diameter, 5/8, but it's the same thing. And we like to get this in big rolls, that way we always have some on hand. Alright, so we've got our main line tubing down. I should mention that you can reuse this stuff. If your row spacing is always the same, you might not ever have to replace it. If your row spacing changes a lot, you can plug the holes and punch new holes in it. But after some time, you'll end up with a ton of holes and you might just want to start fresh. So now we just need to install our filter and pressure regulator. I usually like to do that in the center of the plot, so we'll pick a spot about right here. That's where those pieces will go. That's where our water hose will hook up to this system as well. So here's our filter, our pressure regulator, and then we've got a T here to hook into this main line. Now there's several different ways to assemble this setup here. I think this is one of the easier ways to do it, having the filter, the pressure regulator, and this T. So our water hose hooks in right there, and then our main line tubing will be plugged in to that T right there. Got to have a pressure regulator when you're dealing with drip tape, otherwise you could blow out the drip tape lines. And the filter is extremely important, especially if you're using well water like we are. Catches all those hard particles. We do have to clean this out pretty regularly, but got to have it. So what we want to do here is just cut our main line in half, just like that. And then we're going to put one side of this main line tubing on one side of the T. And then we'll put the other side on this side of the T. Tighten them down. And like I said earlier, that's where our water hose will hook into the system. And now on each end of the plot, we need to cap off this main line tubing so we don't have water spewing out of there. I'm going to trim up this piece right here just a hair, like that. Now I have used these little figure-8 clamps in the past, and they work good for crimping the ends of the mainline tubing. The only problem I have with those, sometimes I run over them, sometimes I step on them and they break. So I've started using these beefier end caps here, and I like these a lot better because they last longer for me. So we're just going to slide that on there, and then we'll tighten it down just like that. And I always like to kind of put a brick over the end of it just like that. Now that our main line is capped on the ends, we just need to hook into that main line with our drip tape here Already got the fittings on those like I showed you earlier. So we're just going to take our little hole punch here and punch a hole in that main line, and then we're going to pop that fitting into place. You'll hear it pop. That's how you know it's in there good, and we're good to go. And now that that is set up, let's compare using drip tubing, which we have in this bed, versus using drip tape, which we have in this bed. So as you can see there, we use both drip tape and drip tubing in our gardens. I think there are some situations where drip tape works better. There are other situations where drip tubing works better. And there are some situations where you could use either. So in my opinion, drip tape is a lot easier to work with than drip tubing, because drip tubing has this coiled up memory, whereas the drip tape doesn't. That's why we use drip tape in the in-ground garden when we're working with longer rows, for instance like these 30-foot rows behind me. Now there's a lot of different brands of drip tape out there. There's several different thicknesses of drip tape. There's different emitter spacings you can get, and all that can get kind of confusing for a beginner. So I really like this Irrigation P1 tape here. That's what we use when we're using drip tape. Now I use a couple different thicknesses. Sometimes I use the 8 mil thick tape. Sometimes I use the 15 mil thick tape. The 15 mil is twice as thick as the 8 mil. It's a little more durable, but it's also a little harder to get the connections installed on. So the 8 mil is a little easier to work with, but the 15 mil lasts much longer. We also have some tape with a 6-inch emitter spacing. We use some tape that has a 12-inch emitter spacing. Lately, I've been leaning more towards the 6-inch emitter spacing tape, just because it puts out basically twice as much water, and we don't have to run our drip system for near as long as we do when we're using the 12-inch spacing tape. Now, one question we get a lot from people who've never used drip tape is, can you reuse it like you can the drip tubing? Yes, you can reuse it. You can reuse the 15 mil tape a lot more than you can reuse the 8 mil tape. Usually I can get 2 or 3 seasons maybe out of a piece of 8 mil tape. I can get quite a few seasons out of a piece of 15 mil tape. So drip tape's going to work great for those long straight rows in an in-ground garden. Now let's talk about when we like to use the tubing. So drip tubing is going to work better when you have real short rows or only need real short pieces, kind of like in that round raised bed I showed you earlier. Also, if you've got a garden that curves a little bit, you can curve this stuff. You can't curve the drip tape. Or maybe you've got a lot of 90-degree angles that you need to run irrigation on. A lot easier to do that with the tubing than it is the tape. Other benefits of the drip tubing include the fact that the fittings are cheaper and easier to install. A lot of times you're going to also get more water output with the drip tubing than you will the drip tape. So if you've got things on a timer and you don't want to run it as long, tubing may be the way to go. Now, because this tubing has some coiled up memory, like I mentioned earlier, staples are a must. We don't necessarily have to have staples with the drip tape, but when we're using the tubing, we almost always need staples to hold it in place. So to recap, we like to use drip tape for the in-ground garden where we have long straight rows. We like drip tubing for raised beds and containers where the rows are shorter and the rows might not always be straight. But like I told you earlier, there are some situations where drip tubing or drip tape will work. In this bed of potato onions, we have drip tape, but we could just as easily use drip tubing in here as well. And it would look just like this right here, where we have the drip tubing ran on these Egyptian walking onions. So in the case of these longer rectangular raised beds that could go either way, I tend to just use what I have. So whatever I have underneath the barn that's already cut to length, just recycle that and kind of plug and play out here. I don't prefer one over the other. In these longer beds, we just use what we've got and try to be resourceful, reusing the tape or the tubing as many times as we can. Now, whether you're using drip tape or drip tubing, one thing that's going to really help you out is standardizing your row length and bed length somewhat. That way it makes it easier to reuse this stuff. So out here in the dream garden, all these plots are 30 by 35. All our rows are 30 foot long. That means I can pull up lines from one plot, turn around and use them on another plot. And with the exception of those round raised beds, all those other beds are relatively the same length. And I did that for a reason. That way we could plug and play our drip lines, pull lines out of one bed, put them in another bed, move them around and reuse them as many times as possible. So we've been using drip irrigation for quite a while, but my opinion is not the end all be all. So if you use drip tape, drip tubing, or both in your garden, please do share your experiences in the comments below. That way somebody who's new to irrigation that's maybe on the fence can decide which way they want to go. So I hope you enjoyed the video today. Be sure to check out our affiliate links, coupon codes, and those irrigation blogs in the description below. And if you want to learn more about our raised bed irrigation system, check out this video right here, one we made when we were just installing these beds, running the main line tubing for all the beds, showing you how we buried it to make things really, really easy in the future. So check that out, and we'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.